Grief is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Welcome to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm the founder of the Empower Grief Journey coaching and podcast platform. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode brings real conversations with people from around the world who have navigated grief and discovered the strength to create new, inspired beginnings. Together, we'll walk from grief to empowerment through stories, practical tools, and actionable insights. You'll uncover hidden gifts within your grief, reclaim your personal power, and step into a future filled with courage and hope. Today, I have a special guest with us. Her name is Cherie Nassi, out of California. She's a therapist with over 14 years of experience facilitating support groups and providing individual and family therapy. Her career began in family support services with the Department of Children and Family Services before creating teen programs at Palisades Charter High School for adolescents coping with chronic illness and parental illness. She went on to specialize in psycho-oncology, supporting patients through cancer diagnosis and treatment at the Cancer Support Community, UCLA's Sims Mann Center, and St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. Today, Cherie leads talks on her three steps to heal from trauma and grief and runs grief and trauma groups in her private practice. Also works with clients at the Trauma and Beyond Center. I'm real excited to have Cherie on the show to share her perspective about going through grief and trauma in her own world and how she helps so many people in her community learn how to navigate through that path. So, without further ado, Cherie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have quite a extensive background in trauma and grief therapy, and I'd love for you to share with our audience a little bit more about your background and more about your personal grief story.
Yeah, it's interesting. As a society, we don't talk about grief or death and dying a lot. I think a lot of the times, especially in American culture, it's often kind of avoided as a difficult conversation. So our children kind of grow up not having this kind of wealth of information. Um, and I didn't really know I had this wealth of information. I thought I was kind of like everybody else, but as I've grown older, I've kind of learned that in fact I do have you know, a particularly special view on aging and death and dying. My father was 72 years old when I was born. And so I grew up with an elderly father. He wasn't the dad that, threw balls in the backyard with us or coached soccer practice or, really took us anywhere. He was quite elderly growing up. When I was, around 10 years old, excuse me, he was diagnosed with dementia and Alzheimer's. And I didn't really realize this as a 10-year-old. I just saw him decline. And so what happened was, I believe he was late 80s when I was graduating from high school, and I started noticing changes in him, and I started having to take care of him in a different way. So I started, the roles really turned. I would now take care of him. I would start making him meals and helping him get dressed, and he declined rapidly. He was in a wheelchair at my high school graduation. And I remember when I left for college, I would fly home for the summers and have to take care, well, I'd want to, but I'd have to take care of him, meaning helping him in and out of bed, taking him for walks in his walker, taking him for walks in his wheelchair, getting him dressed and feeding him. And so I did it with such love and such pleasure because he was my father and I cared about him and I wanted him to be well, but it was quite a learning experience to see my father decline in such a rapid way. And with the loss of his memory, it became very hard and difficult. He forgot how to feed himself. He forgot, our names. He forgot who we were. It was just very difficult. And then he passed when I was 21 years old on New Year's Eve. I remember it because it was New Year's Eve and everybody was celebrating and the town, you could hear just joy all around you outside of the house. There was like, people screaming and cars going around and just such activity kind of on the outside of my house and on the inside of my house. There I was sitting next to the body of my dead father. So It was quite emotional of an experience. And then the aftermath of that, my watching my mom grieve, watching my family grieve, and then having to, what I felt at the time was having to kind of hold it all together for everybody else. Um, and then the aftermath of like, he was old. In reality, he was 92 years old when he passed. And that, as much as that helped me kind of come to terms with his death, it didn't make it any easier. It just kind of gave me a reason, right? We look often for reasons why. When a young person dies, it's why. When your partner dies, it's why. But, when an older person dies, it's kind of like, okay, well, they had a good life. And I was hoping that that would make it easier for me, but it truly didn't. The other thing I noticed was I had years of prep work, essentially. I had years of looking at the face of an elderly man, kind of, with this daily fear of, is it going to be today? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is it going to be when I'm at school? And so I actively prepped. I would write him goodbye letters a lot in my journals growing up. And I thought that would help, but it was still very, very difficult. Just the loss of your father, the loss of, this person in your family.
I can't imagine how hard that must have been to go through Alzheimer's, that journey in itself, because there's people I've talked to that have gone through that, and there's a lot of anticipatory grief that comes along with it because you get told how this path is going to look, what it's probably going to feel like, and so you know what's going to happen essentially in the end, and you feel like you're in this state of limbo, knowing what to expect, and you're not really ready for it. You're not really sure how it's going to play out. So you're almost in the state of suspense. And, as you said, when that happened on New Year's Eve, everybody's out celebrating and partying and having a great time. And then you're faced with the ultimate reality that your father just passed away and you're in a completely different place from where the world's at.
Yeah, it was such a stark contrast. And, I remember, I mean, just the phone calls of all my friends, like, Cherie, let's go out. Cherie, and I just didn't know how to handle it. And to this day, I think, as you know, grief doesn't go away, it just changes. And learning how to take the death of my father and honor it versus feeling something that's, a travesty that's happened to me. Um, and the lost memories, I think something that I've realized is that the creation of lost memories. So, for example, when I got married, I had intense lost memories about my father. And it wasn't it wasn't grief. I wasn't in current present grieving, but it was a loss, a memory of a grief, a memory of the loss that I had when my father died. And so what happened is grief takes a new form of like, I am grieving the loss of my father in my present life, in terms of he's not there to walk me down the aisle, for example. He's not there to see my babies getting born. That's a lost memory. And to honor that as well and to label it and to bring it into your experience and talk about it as well is very powerful.
Yeah, I think, something I wanted to ask you about that, along with those memories, is you mentioned a little bit about this topic of being strong for others as you were going through that loss with your father. And I have somebody in my family who does that a lot. They lean into this. I've got to be strong for everybody. I got to keep a straight face. Don't show any emotion. I got this handled. And I've often found that mindset is really suppressing all the emotions and the feelings that we naturally are supposed to have in these moments. And oftentimes I equate being strong to this thing that's going to seep out at some point in a very, big way in our aspects of life when we go through grief. When you look back on that, did you feel that being strong was in some ways protecting you from feelings that you were wanting to have, or was this, just trying to help other people be comfortable as they went through grief?
Yeah, being strong or perhaps avoiding your feelings, or, it's a protective measure. It's a defense mechanism. We do it for various reasons to, save face for others, to protect ourselves, to not feel. Um, yeah. And like you said, it does seep out. It comes out eventually. It's like trying to push a balloon down in a pool of water. It's going to come up eventually. And It's scary. I think we don't want to feel things. We avoid feeling. We don't want to be sad. We don't want to feel the depression and the overwhelm. Um, and yeah, I was 21 years old when he died. I perhaps didn't have my toolkit of coping, of healthy coping, of people to talk to, that I have now. And I think that really kind of set me up for the work I do now. I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to talk to other people about, death and dying, but also loss and what that looks like and how to honor it and how to kind of live alongside it. Like you said, go from grief to empowerment.
Well, I like your philosophy you shared a little bit that grief doesn't ever really go away, but it just changes. And that's something that I've learned the hard way through my losses in my own life that, everybody in my world has always taught me growing up that you've got to get over something, you've got to let go of it, life moves on. And in today's world, I think what's particularly challenging is we live in such an instant gratification society where everything's at our fingertips, we can get things very quickly. And so I think our mind is so high speed and so fast. And then when we have something like this happen, where you lost your father, or I lost my grandfather, or my child, it literally is almost like something coming along just knocks you off your course really, really hard and abruptly. And like you said, a lot of us aren't really given the tools on how to handle that when that time comes.
Yeah, and I think that something I work on with my clients is what happens when those waves of grief hit. And like you said, you don't always know when it's going to happen or come. And, I think with panic and anxiety and these grief waves, it's like you're so afraid of it hitting you because you're so afraid of being debilitated by it because you don't know what's going to happen. I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to be able to, get through this panic wave or this grief wave. And so that's a lot of the perhaps avoidance. That's a lot of the saving face. That's a lot of like, I have to be strong because I don't want to have to deal with like the other side of this and what that looks like. And so I really work with my clients, my grief clients, and like, how do we handle those waves? What do we do when those waves hit of grief, depression, anxiety, panic, fear, all of that? It's all part of it. Grief incorporates, it's an umbrella term. It incorporates so many different emotions, um, and how to kind of deal with those head on.
What do you recommend when you talk to somebody who's going through grief and feels a grief wave? Because I get those occasionally, especially around my son. That's the one I get big grief waves at time, and I have learned over the last 3 years, don't try to control it and don't try to like preempt it, so to speak, or try to navigate that thing easy up front. Like let yourself be in it for a minute, let yourself ride the wave. I'm just curious what your perspective is, how you would coach people going through a grief wave.
Yeah, so exactly like you said. So I think it's actually two pieces. There's two parts of it. There's the fear of it and it. So we, like you said, it's like I don't know when this is going to happen. So we create a relationship of the not wanting to. So I have a relationship with the not wanting to. And I don't want to feel. I don't want to have it hit. I'm scared of it. So that in and of itself is its own fear. We see this in panic. Like I feel the overwhelming doom. I feel I'm going to have a heart attack. That in and of itself, if we can separate that from the experience, that's its own fear. I fear it's going to hit. I fear the wave is going to come. And so visualizing that experience, labeling that experience, and putting that experience to the side and leaning into, okay, it's coming, right? So when we like that balloon, if you push that, but it's not gonna stay down. We just focus on the pushing of it down. I just want it to be pushed down. And so letting that go and opening that door to, I'm having feelings. I'm sad. I'm feeling my kid. I'm feeling my kid right now. I'm having memories of my son right now, my child right now. If you, wherever you are, if you can take a few minutes, if you can excuse yourself, go lay down, if you could lean into the person that's in front of you and say, gosh, I'm really feeling the loss of my child right now. And can I talk about him for a second? Can I kind of talk up to you about what I'm feeling? And lean into it. And if you cry, you cry. Yeah, I might cry, the tears are coming up, or, I'm getting a better relationship with these tears. Let me talk to you about my memories and going into kind of this helps build that kind of restoration orientation, that, like you said, that empowerment of this is my life, this is what I've went through. Not being so afraid of the wave hitting, but leaning into the wave of saying, this is coming up for me. Oh gosh, I feel it in my chest right now. Let me just kind of talk about my son. Let me talk about my dad. Let me talk about my partner. Let me talk about this person that was so special to me. And so studies have shown, right? The more you lean into it, the more you talk about it, the more you honor it, you move through it in a different way. You're not moving on, you're not moving, you move through it. You create this, again, restoration orientation of how can I honor this experience? And it makes us a stronger person.
I really think it does because I've talked to over 100 people on my podcast this year, and I love that society has the mentality of move on and let go and get over it. I have not found that in over 100 people I've talked to on my podcast. Not a single one has had that
Right.
mindset. And so it made me question in a lot of ways. I said, well, we have these societal beliefs, and I wonder where they come from, by the way, because we're humans. We have emotion. All of us do. It doesn't matter what gender you are or whatever it doesn't matter. We're all humans with emotions when we level it down to that. And so, like you said, which I really love, is how do we honor this? How do we hold space for this? How do we make sense of it? Because one of the big questions you brought up a few minutes ago was the big question of why. And that's a big question that I see with everybody who's gone through loss, whether you've lost a child like me or a father like you. We end up in this place of why did this have to happen? Why did this happen to me? Why did this have to be right here in this moment? And that why question, by the way, elicits us to go within ourselves all the time when we ask why. We're seeking a deeper purpose and meaning to whatever that experience is in front of us. And the sad part is sometimes that answer won't come right away. It might come a month later, a year later, 5 years later. It might come at a certain point because we're all individual as we walk our grief journey. But I do think when we give ourselves space, as you said, to lean into those grief waves and feel them, I think that why becomes more apparent when we listen to our emotions and hold space for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, what you said earlier is people tell us to move on and get over it. And I think awareness of that, that's their stress response. So like the mother that's consoling the child, like, don't cry, you're fine. It's her own stress that she doesn't like coming up. And so to dampen or stop their stress or their reactions, they push that onto the person in front of them and said, "You're fine, get over it." Or he was old, it was his time, or they were sick, or he's in a better place. Like we hear all these platitudes of like, well, it's still overwhelmingly difficult. And the question like you asked is, why did this happen? Why did this person die? And so for that point, I go into the just radical acceptance. How do I deal with the why? You may never find the why, right? You may never have a reason. There is no reason for a child so young to die, to not make it. There's no reason. It's horrible, it's painful. And I notice we often get stuck in the why. And there is no reason. God or the universe, or it just wasn't meant to be. I mean, it's just so monumental. And I argue you may never find a reason that's good enough for you to make you feel like, oh, okay, that's why. And so when you're confronted with that, you become stuck. And so I use the term just radical acceptance or awareness of this happened, this horrible, horrible, horrible thing happened. And now what? And now how do I live? And now how do I move through? Um, And like what you said, it's other people's stress, but it's our acceptance of it, and radical acceptance of it.
Well, that's a big word. That's why I call myself an acceptance coach because I had to find acceptance in one of the worst moments of my life, and that
Yeah.
was not easy, by the way. I tell everybody that acceptance doesn't mean that you wake up one day and all of a sudden all the feelings are gone, the emotions are gone, you're just free and clear to move. Acceptance is just a place where you can say, I don't like what happened, I don't agree with what happened, but I accept that it did happen. And I'm willing to acknowledge that this is my experience of what happened. And so It's exactly to your point of what you said. You've talked about it a little bit so far, which is about honoring that loss. It brings you to that place of how do I carry my grief forward with me in this journey? What does that look like? And is there a bigger purpose or a bigger meaning to what happened through this? And that radical acceptance you're talking about is where I tell people you can find a lot of hidden gifts, lessons, and blessings through this moment because it didn't have to be all for nothing. It didn't have to be a massive tragedy in your life. It didn't have to be those things. It will feel that, by the way, we will, because that's a natural part of grief. But we can also sit there and say, when we lean into honoring, or remembering, and finding purpose and meaning through this, that sometimes there's a bigger gift for us that will not only help ourselves heal, but we'll be able to go out there to other people who've experienced a similar loss to ours and help them navigate their own grief journey.
Yeah, I think that's also very important is being of service to other people and sharing your experience. And the more we talk about it, the more we talk about our pain, our difficulties, our loss, the more that we can be there for other people. And when we're there for other people, acts of service heal us as well. We get the same when we serve other people or when we help other people, we get that same reward system in our brain that makes our nervous system relax, that calms us down. That's like a big warm hug to our nervous system that takes us out of that sympathetic response and into a parasympathetic response where we can heal.
And I think that's part of the healing process that can be very, very welcoming and warm for a lot of people because something I learned in grief is that we end up in a very emotional, volatile place. And I mean that with endearment, by the way, not the way most people talk about it. I'm saying that we end up where our emotional state is so heightened, we're hyper vigilant, we're hyper aware, we're hypersensitive to things. And it's not because we have a problem, it's not because of that. It's because grief is really love with nowhere to go. And so we're searching for places where we can feel seen, feel heard, feel understood, feel safe, feel comforted by things. And I wanted to ask you about that too a little bit, as far as finding people when you're going through grief, because I've come to find that on my own grief journey, I found people that are simply not safe to be around. And when I say that, they say the wrong things. They say insensitive things, or they're just not able to hold space for us. What are your thoughts on, being able to find safe space when you're going through grief?
Well, yeah, I mean, this kind of speaks to the trauma piece, right? Like you've been through trauma. And when we go through trauma, our nervous system goes into fight or flight. And it's, what do I need to do? Your brain goes on hyper alert it's overworking of, you could say I'm fine. I need to figure out what to do next. I need to figure out where safe is. I need to take care of. I need to plan. I need to, your nervous system goes wackadoodle. And like you said, and that you could be in the state for a very long time. I would say, I've seen people years in this state of fight or flight. Um, and it's learning how to find safety. So only when we can find and create safety in our bodies, in our environments, can we heal. And so what happens then is you start to move out into the environment after this loss, after this trauma, and you're confronted by like perhaps a well-intended person saying, "Oh, they're in a better place," and you just kind of want to, wring them by the neck. But yeah, what that does is it reactivates that trauma. It's kind of like rips that band-aid off of that wound, and then you're left just wounded again and tender and sore and sensitive. And then you have to go through this healing process again. Um, and not all of us can do that. Not all of us know how to do that. So, it is important to find others who have gone through what you've gone through. Support groups are amazing. I have a grief support group, a healing from trauma support group that I do. And within those groups, we heal. We have observational healing, we have community healing and growth and supporting others and hearing others' stories. And so, yes, it is important to find your people. But also, having those kind of what I call like back pocket sayings or statements that you can kind of keep in your back pocket to deliver to those perhaps well-intended people that tell you, they're in a better place. Like, really working with someone to kind of figure out what do you want to say to that well-intended person that's like, well, I don't think that right now. I want my child. I want my dad. I want my partner with me. I don't want this. I think that's really important too. And to know that, to have empathy when we're confronted with that kind of statement that just drives us bonkers is to have empathy for the other person as well as ourselves, but to have empathy for the other person who, again, perhaps is well intended. Like I see what you're trying to do. I may not like what you're saying or it doesn't resonate with me, but here is kind of that, back pocket statement where I could say, thank you for caring. I'm, maybe don't give them the whole story if your nervous system doesn't feel safe with them, and then wait for the person that you do feel safe with to share your story with.
I really appreciate you saying that because that was one of the hardest parts of my own grief journey. And the one that really hurt me was after I lost my son. I cannot describe the number of insensitive comments I heard from people. And I did in my early stages of grief, I would go off on somebody and say, that's inappropriate to say, or why would you say that? And I would kind of get very aggressive about it. And one day I got to this place where you were talking about just now about empathy. And I was on a podcast with somebody when they brought this up, but it made me sit back and reflect after the show. And I sat there and said, I lost my child the way I lost my child. My wife and I were the only ones there. These other people weren't. And these other people haven't lost a child like that. They don't know what that's like. They can't even imagine or fathom what that's even going to look like or feel like or what path we're walking right now. And I did get to that place where I said, as much as that's going to hurt, and it's going to, and it's always going to hurt, I got to say, they were never there. It wasn't their experience. And so they're never, ever going to give me what I'm looking for. They're never going to be able to really meet my needs in that moment. They're just not. And I sat there and said, that's okay, because I came to realize that we can only empathize really with people to the level of our experiences of life. And sometimes when we come across somebody who maybe has lost a father to Alzheimer's, or like me that's lost a child to stillbirth, if we haven't experienced that moment of life, if we haven't felt those emotions in that moment, it's hard for us to resonate. It's hard for us to connect with it. And so sometimes we do say insensitive things. We say the wrong thing or we say a blanket statement about it. And it's not that there's something wrong with that person. It's not about that. It's the fact that this is really our journey. It's our experience. And the one thing that we can do, by the way, is not, lash out, so to speak, towards those other people. We can just say that they haven't had our experience and that's okay. They're doing the best they can do right now to be supportive, just like we're trying to do the best we can in our healing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think anger and reaction is like the secondary emotion, right? We react when we're angered, but there's always more emotions underneath. And taking a pause, you can always take a pause. You can always buy time to respond. Just, you don't need to respond right away to someone's comments. And I encourage that. I say, if someone says something that you don't like, buy some time. You don't have to reply, you don't have to respond right away. And those, that anger, that judgment, that reaction, look at that. Like, what's coming up for me? Why am I boiling right now? Why am I so angry right now? And if you buy that time, you give yourself a gift of opportunity to look deeper into what's coming up for you. What are you feeling? And it's usually sadness, rejection, loss, perhaps unseen, perhaps not being understood. And then when you have the time to figure that out, to see what's coming up for you, you could say, like exactly what you said, this person doesn't understand what I've gone through, and that's okay. And I don't want them to. I don't want them to have it gone through what I went through, God forbid. And so looking at kind of those under anger feelings of they don't see me and that's okay, right? And then having the time to respond to them instead of that big reaction. It's like, I see what you're doing. I see what you're saying. Thank you for your kindness. Perhaps leaving it there. And you always have the opportunity to go back and say, you know, I reacted to you in a way because of this. I want to thank you for
Mm.
your time. Thank you for your care and compassion.
I really love that because thing that you brought up that I found really important was that we don't always have to share all of our story with everyone. And I
Right.
thought that was really powerful that you shared that because when we are in the throes of grief, and I'm sure you felt the same way when you lost your father, I did. I know I felt it on my own journey that we're always looking for somebody to share that story with. We want to like get it out, and not everybody's a good fit for that. And when I say that, I mean that you might tell that story to somebody that's going to give you the wrong response you're looking for. And so giving yourself permission, by the way, to identify that, give yourself the permission to say, this might not be the person that this can happen with, and that's okay. And like you said, leaving it at a short statement, a short acknowledgement. But when you do find those people, by the way, that can hold space for you and they give space to hear your story, they let you just be. If you need to cry, if you need to scream, if you need to just share what you're feeling in the moment, there's going to be those people that say, you can say that with me. I can hold space for you. Let's just move through this moment right now together. It brings when you do find those people, by the way, when you're going through grief, it's almost like this relief comes over you. It's like you feel like the 1,000-pound boulders off your shoulders and you feel
Yeah.
that full heart of support.
Yeah, you feel seen. And that's so important to our nervous system. When we feel seen, when we feel heard, when we feel understood, our nervous system can relax. Our nervous system, you talked about this hypervigilance. And so that stems from trauma. And we've gone through trauma. And so now our nervous system is hypervigilant. Who's going to hurt me, right? You're on the defense. When am I going to, who is going to hurt me? And so, yeah, it's funny you say that. So I was 21 when my dad died, and talking to other 21-year-olds about death, let alone your parent dying and how you're feeling, and it just in the, in the middle of college, it's a joke. And so then I would then, like you say, start sharing my story with someone, and then you see their face go blank. You see them start to kind of retreat and pull back, and you're like, oh goodness, I've shared too much. So you really quickly discover who is safe and who isn't safe. And it's only for me taken time to find that safety. Now, when I talk to people, and I find someone who's had the loss of a parent, I do feel seen. It's this quiet kind of understanding now of like, you get it. I understand you. You get it. I've been through loss. I've been through death. I've been through grieving. And then you can
So
help others. You can support others, it's crazy. Like a lot of times I'll talk to someone and I'm like, oh yeah, my dad died. They're like, oh, my dog died. And it's like, okay, yeah, you think you understand what I've gone through because your dog died, and I get that too. And dogs are amazing and horrible loss as well. So, again, empathy kicks in. It's thank you for sharing that story with me too. It doesn't feel quite the same, but they're again well intended and they're trying to make a connection. And that's kind of what I focus on is it doesn't feel the same, and they don't get, like, we feel like they don't get it, but they are trying to be compassionate. And that's kind of the point of the connection there.
Yeah, I love how you said that. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that experience with your father because you went through that at a very young age, right through your teenage years. And one of the topics that gets brought up on my shows at times is this idea of anticipatory grief. And I do think that's a very, very real thing, especially when you're walking through an Alzheimer's journey, because that's where like you said, you don't know when things are going to happen. The deterioration that happens through that process is kind of unknown. Sometimes I've had it happen in my family where it's been very, very fast, and other times it's been very, very long for it to happen. How did you deal with that anticipatory grief from a young age?
Yeah, so, I didn't know he was dying I was a child. But I did know that he was an elderly parent. I knew that he was an elderly father. Um, he was a brilliant man. He was a physician over here at the VA hospital in Westwood. So he was quite revered. So we'd have people always over at the house talking to him. He was a very smart man. And so I was used to my father being a very smart man. And then I started seeing him decline. And, something I do with my clients is a loss memory chart. And we work together to list all of our losses and all of our grief. And I did one for myself. And through that, I had this memory. I was around 11, and I remember sitting on his lap, and, he started tearing up and he said, "Cherie, I'm dying." And I remember going, "What, Daddy? What?" He said, "I'm dying." And I remember saying, my mom getting very upset with him and saying, "Don't say that to her." And I was like, "You're not dying." And I think that was the first time I realized he's going to die. And I didn't quite know what to do with that, but it stuck with me. And I had the visual, right, of him aging and decompensating. Um, and I loved him. I think what the difference was, I leaned into it. I really quickly had an awareness that I'm not going to have him forever. And I just began to take advantage of every moment I could have with him. And so, my summers, I wasn't out, partying with my friends. I was kind of home. I'd be home and I'd help. We had someone help care for him during the day because my mom was working full time. And so I would help her get him dressed. I would wake up and go to him and snuggle with him. And I kind of had this awareness, which I consider the greatest gift of being able to realize that you don't have people forever. Life is a gift. Aging is a gift. Wrinkles are a gift. Graying is a gift. And I felt so fortunate. I think that's the difference is I felt so fortunate. I wasn't a victim of my circumstance. Like you said, I was empowered at a very young age, whether I realized it or not, to take the opportunity of time. I didn't feel like I was losing time. I felt like I was taking advantage of the time that I had with him. And that kind of made me grow up really quick. Again, I would get him dressed, but I did it in such a loving way. I didn't feel like I had to get him dressed. I feel like I wanted to. I was like, "All right, Dad, let's go for a walk around the block." And it was me and him, and he was at his little walker, and it was just, I thought the cutest thing. And we would meet, people on the street and chat. And so I think that was a profound awakening for me, is to look at the time with him as a gift and opportunity to be taken advantage of and not a loss.
Well, it sounds like because you took advantage of those moments and was in that empowered state with him, you have all these good memories to look back on, even though that was a hard time, a very hard time, but
Um,
you took advantage. Like you said, time is a gift, age is a gift, wrinkles are a gift. I love that, by the way. But I just love that you have these memories that you can pull on today and say that I didn't look back and have, this horrible memory of things. I took my time with my dad. I took time to spend with him and create good memories out of this lost journey. I think that's a very powerful way to walk that grief journey.
Yeah, and we can also do work on that too. Like, not everyone had that opportunity. Perhaps it was difficult for you. Perhaps there were more traumatizing memories or experiences or triggers that you went through. And working on those memories and how we can kind of flip that script into, honor, right? And empowerment and acceptance. How can we look at those perhaps more painful memories and change them to more memories of acceptance and awareness?
So I wanted to ask you a little bit, as you after 21, it sounds like you got into psychology at that point. Would you say that your dad gave you, in some ways, a gift to jump into this field and help other people in the trauma and grief space?
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I felt at the time I had to be strong for everybody else. Again, I watched my mom deal with a aging husband, and she had three kids. There, I had two older brothers. And so in her middle years, she was working full time. She was dealing with the decompensating husband partner who really wasn't there, who now became essentially a fourth child for her, a person that she had to feed and get dressed and, make sure he wouldn't fall, make sure that she had to then work to pay for an assistant, an aide, a nurse, a care person, very difficult. And she wasn't there for us. And so having that compassion too of like, I just wanted to be a kid, honestly. I just wanted to go and party or whatever with my friends and feel free. And I didn't have that really. And watching kind of the side effects, for lack of a better word, of that relationship on my brothers and what that did to, my brothers as men growing up and not really having that father figure to kind of show them the way into manhood. And so it was quite difficult. And I became, the caretaker for everybody. I became the person that everybody could rely on and talk to. And it felt like a burden at times. And I remember being in college and I was a dancer and a theater major, and then just realizing, wow, that's not my calling. Psychology is my calling. And so after 2 years of being a dance and theater major, I swapped and switched to a psych degree. So I, graduated within 2.5 years within that degree. I did a 4-year degree in 2.5 years, and I graduated with my BA in psychology. And it's been the most amazing journey, the most amazing experience. And yeah, I credit that to my upbringing and being a supportive person to everyone else. I will say, though, boundaries have become very important to me. And so, learning appropriate boundaries, learning healthy boundaries became um, something that I had to do quite early on is like I can't be there for you all the time. I can't help you solve, all of your problems. I can't be the liaison in between all of my, family relationships. So so that became very important to me to focus on boundaries as well.
I appreciate you bringing up the topic of boundaries because that is something I have struggled with my entire life. I still have a very hard time with it. Looking back, a lot of the trauma I went through, I could confidently tell you if I had learned how to set boundaries a little better, I'm sure half of that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
What would you share with those of us who struggle with boundaries to understand what they are and how to implement that as we're going through grief and trauma? Because I do feel in many ways, boundaries can be a very good tool for us to, in a way, protect ourselves, maybe from extra stress or, comments from people that might be inappropriate or insensitive.
Yeah, boundaries are a little confusing for people. I think we look at boundaries as saying no to other people's needs and desires. I would say it's more learning about saying yes to our needs and desires. And so we often look at it as like, find your no. But I kind of say, find your yes. Find where you do want to spend your energy. Find where you do want to go. And boundaries is there's many different kind of subcategories in boundaries. There's emotional boundaries, there's physical boundaries. When we're in a state of trauma, it's hard for people to get physically close to us. So realizing where are your physical boundaries and saying, number one is building awareness of what you need, what you desire, and what you don't need and what you don't desire. And that hyper vigilance too. It's like I get a little stressed out when people get too close to me. And so then that's your yes. When do I say I need you to come closer? Or when can I say can I need a little bit of space? Material boundaries. We've all kind of had our backpack or our bag next to us. And if someone gets too close to that, we start to get nervous. Or our home. It's okay, we have that person that we'll hang out with, but we won't invite over, right? We have that person that we'll invite over, but we won't invite them for dinner. We have that person we'll invite for dinner, but we won't invite them into our, other rooms of our house. And so building that awareness around where are your boundaries and how to say no, thank you. How to say, again, buying time, not right now. I'm not capable of that right now. I'm not available for that right now. And finding your own level of comfort, I think is very important. And even if you aren't able to have that awareness, you just say, I'm not in the space right now. I am not able to do that right now. And so again, going back to boundaries are our own level of comfort. So we say yes to people because we're afraid of perhaps disappointing people, or we say yes to people because we're afraid of their letdown, or we don't want to let other people down. So then we self-sacrifice for others. And that doesn't go well for very long. So learning how to say no, like finding your no, And then the next step is being comfortable with other people's discomfort, being comfortable with your own levels of letting people down, right? And so I would say you're not letting people down, you're lifting up yourself and finding your yes and finding your safety and creating your safety.
I appreciate you sharing that with us today because that's something when I started setting boundaries, I realized how upset you make other people. And it's very uncomfortable in a lot of ways because, all of a sudden you're saying, hey, this makes me uncomfortable, or I'm not comfortable doing that, or I'd appreciate if you would say this instead of that. When
Right.
you initially take those steps to set boundaries, people will quickly get offended by things. And you'll find out, by the way, as I did on my journey, you'll find out what I like to call safe people from unsafe people. And the unsafe people, by the way, do not react well to your boundaries. They will find ways to, they'll see it as a power thwart of some kind, and they'll try to manipulate things around to get their way. Or try to get you to feel like there's something wrong with you. But the safe people, when you set boundaries, they respect them and they actually respond differently to you when you do set boundaries. They'll give you more space, or they'll hear you, or they'll ask a question, or they'll want to understand more. And it's really a great way for you to try to figure out, like you said, where do I want to say yes to spending my energy?
Yeah, and having awareness that other people's reactions and responses are not your problem. It's that the other people's reactions and responses are not your responsibility. And so really learning how to detach from that, learning how to detach from like if someone gets upset with you, not internalizing that, not taking it on as your fault, right? So when we speak to our boundaries and we find our no, that's enough, right? No is a full sentence. No means no. I don't owe anyone any explanation, and being comfortable with that, right? It's increasing our own level of tolerance with discomfort. And so again, distancing yourself from other people's responses or reactions or anger, perhaps, for example. So knowing that their reaction to my no, their anger to my holding my boundaries is essentially their responsibility. It's not mine. And getting comfortable with that. And speaking to that, like I see that this is upsetting you, but I'm not able to do this for you right now. You could say right now. I see that this is a big deal for you. I'm not able to do that. I'm sorry. You could say I'm sorry if you want, but getting comfortable and knowing that other people's reactions and anger and responses is on them. It's not your responsibility.
I think that's a really beautiful thing because I try to tell people all the time in my coaching, and it's kind of, I love that it's groundbreaking sometimes when I share this thing, but I
Yeah.
tell them that we're not responsible for other people's emotions. And when you're in the throes of grief, by the way, you are dealing with a magnitude of emotions. I can't even, I haven't lost a parent, by the way. I haven't been down that journey yet, so I can't speak to that, but I can only sit there and say, it must be a lot to process the emotions of losing your father, especially over a 10-year period of going through an Alzheimer journey. That's got to be a lot of emotions to process, a lot of emotions to feel. And when we try to manage other people's emotions, by the way, when they throw those on top of what we're trying to actually deal with, it's important, it can really overload the nervous system. It can overload our mind. And eventually, we might break if we take so much emotion on from other people. We're going to break at some point because we're one person, and let alone one person, we're going through our own grief and our own trauma. We're trying to process our own emotions and how we feel with something. And so to let alone manage other people's emotions is just a very unnecessary part of grief that when we do learn to use boundaries appropriately and effectively and as a way to protect our space and our energy and really finding out what we want to say yes to. And I think one of the big yeses is I need to take care of my emotions right now. I need to take care of how I feel right now. I don't have the capacity to worry about other people or how they might respond or react to my boundaries. I don't have the capacity to deal with it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right, exactly. And I think, as a society, we don't think that that's okay. We think that there's something wrong with that. And so, really working with that person with their own beliefs and where did they learn these beliefs, right? And I do a meditation called Teflon Mind. And so it's this idea, it's this meditation based on this idea of Teflon. If you sit with yourself in a meditative experience and try to imagine just like water going off a duck's back, that what people say to you just doesn't penetrate, just doesn't go through, and it kind of just glides off you like Teflon or like water off a duck's back. And so the more that we're able to do that, the more we build that kind of radical acceptance again, that the outside environment can't hurt you, can't, penetrate you, and thus building your sense of safety, thus building kind of your internal sense of agency.
So, Cherie, I want to shift gears a little bit because when we first talked, you shared that you do a lot of community work down in your area outside your own practice. And I wanted to give you some time to share a little bit of space with that because I know that you were down in the area of California that went through some massive wildfires this year that wiped out entire communities, leveled houses to the ground. People lost everything. And I thought it was really beautiful that you spent time helping people on the grief and trauma side through therapy and talking. I wanted you to share a little bit more about that experience and tell us about maybe how that changed your perspective in many ways, or if there were things you learned through that process working so deeply in your community.
Yeah, so we survived the Palisades fire. So I'm in Mandeville Canyon. It's just the canyon over from the Palisades, and it was January 7th. It was just very intense. And what happened was it was prolonged experience of trauma. The community is completely gone. It's not there. Families had left with nothing. Families, like you said, the homes completely burnt down, schools burnt down. The fire started behind my youngest child's school and just kind of went from there. So we had to rescue children from burning buildings. I mean, it was just devastation. And the magnitude of it, I mean, it's miles and miles and miles of community that's completely gone. Homes, schools, places of business. Um, Community centers is all gone. And so this has been such a trauma for people, for our nervous systems. And again, it's you don't have, it's people are, I don't want to move on. I don't want to move on. I want my community back. I want my home back. I want, my comfy bed back, my home, my things, my plates, my albums, my photographs. And it's also what now happens is it's the parents' loss and trauma, but it's also watching the loss and trauma through the eyes of their children, the loss and trauma through the eyes of their teachers. A lot of these schools had to go back in person, if a few weeks later, and so you're witnessing the teachers, like what was once the pillars of strength in your community. I mean, the security guards at your school are now crying in your arms, and I don't know what to do. And so it was very, very difficult. And since then, I've created and hosting a fire victim support group and a grief and trauma support group where people can come and share their stories. And the power behind sharing your story of where you were on January 7th and how you got out is just so monumental, and what you're doing now. And what this fire caused is people had to relocate. And so it's, how do I do that? Can I afford to get a new home? I went from a home to an apartment. I went from an apartment to, and so to my parents' house. Now I'm living with my elderly parent, or getting my elderly parent safe. I mean, talking about finding safety in such trauma and such devastation, and the visuals of, being surrounded by fire in your car or stuck with your child and just praying that you're going to get out alive. And so, and for those who didn't lose their homes, I've heard many, many, many people say, like, gosh, it would almost be better if I did lose my home, because just the grief is so bad, and or kind of, dare I say, the shame of having a home, right? And
Mm.
so having a home to go back to, or insurance isn't paying for the house now because it wasn't destroyed. And so really working with those people, no one is mad that your home is still standing. No one is upset that your home is still standing. We honor and are happy that you do have a home. So letting go of that guilt and shame, it's like survivor's guilt in a sense, letting that go and being, feeling free and content again in a time of trauma, in a time of kind of community trauma and global trauma. But in a time of community trauma, what helps is having that sense of community. So finding a support group, finding people that have gone through what you've gone through. But also, I want to say is proximity, right? So individuals who, like myself, were kind of in the canyon over. And so what I've noticed is people kind of, who are close to the fire but didn't lose anything, feel like they need to be in this grief as well. So they often feel like, well, my community is grieving, I need to grieve. My community has loss, I need to feel the sense of loss. And how do I don't want to move on, right? I don't want to move on until my community's back. And so telling those people, like you, again, you don't have to move on, but you can move through. You can put one foot in front of the other and find safety. And how to do that for yourself, but also how to do that for your children. Being a safe place for your family members that want to talk about it. How do you talk about it? Um, and distraction. I know this is a coping mechanism. It doesn't always, it has a bad rap, right? Avoidance, distraction, but you don't have to put yourself in proximity to the fire, right? You can create some distance. I've noticed that my friends who've moved to, a lot have moved to Santa Barbara, Orange County, Newport. The act of moving on, moving through, um, distraction, right? What can you do? Can you take your kid to the park? Can you build a new hobby? Can you find a new market? In saying that, not I have to go find a new market, but what can I find at that new market? Can I explore that new market? Can I find a farmer's market and get my kids excited about trying a new thing, exploring a new area of the new area that I'm in a state of empowerment, and how to do that through grief. So it's essentially a dual thought process of I hold grief, I hold sadness, but in the same duality, I hold hope and I hold empowerment. I have hope for my future. Um, yeah, it's a really amazing process and a difficult process. And it is difficult. It's going to be difficult, but how can I create kind of, newness? How can I hold hope in creating a new life?
Well, I think it's really beautiful that you are participating in that community rebirth that's going to be happening over the next few years and giving a space for these people to tell their stories. Because I do think that grief that is silenced or suppressed or held in a lot, it's like we said earlier on in this podcast, it's going to come out in some way, shape, or form, and it may not come out in the best way possible unless we give it space and hold space for it. And so, I just want to say I just really love that you're in your community actively helping these people that have likely lost everything in their life and are having to restart over from scratch. And I can sympathize that, sometimes like you said, people that didn't lose their house, sometimes it would have been better if they lost their house. I can understand that. I've worked in mortgages for many years and heard that from people. And I understand it from them why that thought comes across. But I'm just really grateful that, it sounds like you guys as a community have really come together through this very, very tragic moment of life where everybody's being forced to relocate, completely change their lives. Most people probably lost jobs in that moment too, and are now having to really find where's work going to be at, where's home going to be at, where's my kid going to go to school. There's just so much going on in that moment, and that's a lot of trauma to work through and something that people are just not going to forget. And so, but I do think it's going to be something that ultimately will make people all very, very strong in their life going forward because I do think that when we go through losses like this, I really do feel like it makes us a better person for whatever reason. I know that sounds really strange, but I feel like it brings us back to the humanity of who we are as people and seeing each other as just, I'm a human, you're a human, we're walking this experience together, we can help each other together and navigate our way forward.
Yeah, I think Gabor Mate talks about, loss and trauma and how that doesn't make you a weaker person. It makes you a stronger person and it builds character. And we don't think that. We don't know that. We think we're, gone through a travesty and we're weak, and we're a victim, and we're not. And having that knowledge and having that awareness that difficulty, conflict, trauma, loss make you only a stronger person, builds your character, builds who you are and what you believe in.
Yeah, well, I had a friend of mine in mortgages down in Tennessee. She lost her whole house to a house fire probably 4 years ago now, if I remember right. And I remember calling her in a panic and I was saying, Deborah, oh my God, I'm super sorry. I can't believe you lost your house. I mean, are you guys okay? Do you have a place to stay? My mind was just racing because I was really good friends with her. And what I got shocked by was she said, Chris, I'm fine. I'm okay. And I was going, how? You just lost everything. And she said, I'm upset about how it happened. And she said, I'll tell you that. And I have a family member I'm not talking to anymore because of that. But she said, I had so much crap in my house. It's this stuff that I meant to clean for years. And she said, all the photos were digitalized. All the big memory things we had can be recovered. They were in storage. So she said, I lost a house. Whoop-de-doo. She said, it's a house. She said, I can go build a new one or buy another one. I can do that because of insurance and this and that. And I sat there and said, my reaction was like, you lost everything and you're seeing this as an opportunity. And I've seen that in certain ways through different situations with house fires and things like that. And I love that spirit of essence within those people to see that grief doesn't have to be, again, a big, huge tragedy of things, but they see it as an opportunity. And sometimes starting over gives us that new chance we were looking for, but we were holding on to the past so hard. We were holding on to what we were comfortable with, what we were familiar with, what we were trying to manage in our life because it was all we knew at that time. And then things like this happen, all of a sudden, all the weight and the pressure we had just all of a sudden lifts and it's gone. And by the way, it does not mean that we sit there and say, oh, we're glad this happened or we're excited it happened. That's not what I'm saying. We sit there and go, whoa, this pressure's gone. Holy cow. Like, I don't have to worry about this anymore. Or maybe I have this new opportunity. Maybe I wanted to move and I never took the chance. And now I do have that opportunity on me because it got forced upon me. And so it's why I always say that at a certain point in the grief journey, a certain point in trauma journeys, the hidden gifts, the lessons, and the blessings, they come through when they're meant to happen, when they're meant to find you. And, when you get open to those things, when you see them come in front of you, that's where everything starts having a new purpose and a new meaning and a new direction of life. And that's where I truly believe that, in those moments, we do end up in certain ways saying, in some ways, I'm grateful this happened. In other ways, this was really hard and I'm working on that. But it's this new chapter of life that grief gives us of walking away from who we were in the past to stepping into who we're meant to be in the future. And I truly believe that, like you said, grief and loss and trauma does not make us weak people. I just don't believe that at all. I think it makes us very resilient. I think it makes us a very strong person. And I think it sets us up to be better people to give more and contribute more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully said. Exactly.
Yeah. Cherie, I just want to say as we wrap up the podcast, thank you so much for being a guest today and sharing your journey of losing your father and where that journey led you into the world today of helping people, not just in your own practice of therapy, but going into your community that was ravaged by fires earlier this year and holding space and giving people a space to share their story and help them navigate grief and trauma with a listening heart and an open mind. I just think you have a beautiful gift that started with your father, and it makes me feel very humble inside to know that there's somebody like you out there giving people what they might not have ever found had you not had your walk of life. So I just want to say thank you for being the person that you are.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been such a pleasure to come on your podcast today.
And I usually wrap up my podcast asking my guests a couple questions. One of them would be if you run into somebody who's going through grief or maybe feels stuck in grief, what's one thing you would share with them to help them navigate their journey just a little bit easier?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the particular type of loss of grief. We always have a friend in heaven. There is more to this life, and how can we connect and stay close to and honor the person that has departed? Connect with friends, connect with others, find comfort in yourself and in your home. Don't push yourself. It doesn't need to get figured out today, right? We don't need to take on all of the to-do list right away. Take time for yourself to really slow down and be with those around you that you love and that love you and that you feel loved from.
I think that's beautiful advice and well said. I couldn't agree more with you on that. And Cherie, I wanted to ask if people want to connect with you after listening to today's episode of the podcast, where can they find you?
Yeah, well, I am a psychotherapist in Los Angeles. I have my website is nassicounseling.com. You can email me, Cherie@nassicounseling.com, and I'm happy to connect and help in any way that I can.
Well, for listeners listening today, I will have links to her social media and her website for you guys in the show notes. So when you get done listening to this episode, check there and reach out to Cherie. As you guys have heard today, she's an awesome person with a very big experience in the grief work and grief field. And I really just think you guys should connect with her. She's a beautiful soul doing beautiful work. So,
Thank you.
Cherie, thank you so much for being on today's show.
Thank you very much.
And I want to thank listeners for joining us today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Cherie's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Podbean. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.